Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome to our new Let's Play series of War in the East 2. This is the second Let's Play series that the channel is introducing, and in this particular series, we are going to be playing the 1941 scenario as the Soviets. Now, we currently already have a playlist active on the channel that looks at the Stalingrad to Berlin scenario, playing as the Soviets. And in that one, we try to every couple of turns introduce from the community, myself, or what have you, new tidbits, new mechanics, new things about the game. So if you're looking to first get into War in the East 2, and you're looking for a little bit more of an introduction into the game, I would suggest you check out that particular series, which will be linked in the description below, where we look at Stalingrad to Berlin. In this series, we're going to be looking at how the Soviets can withstand the initial Barbarossa blitzkrieg that the Germans employed against them in the summer of 1941. Now, in this series, we're not going to be diving into explanations of many mechanics, but I will continuously go through and explain all the steps that I'm taking and try to give some background into my general decision making, why I'm using a certain tactic or strategy. I am not an expert in the Gary Grigsby series of games. I think at best you could probably label me as an average player. So if you do have pieces of advice that would be either useful for me or useful for the rest of the audience as they also watch the series, I would ask that you do please add that to the comments section below. Not only for my benefit, but again, as a general community, the more we can share tips and tricks about this game, the more we can open it up to other players. I think we can really broaden the audience and really, my own personal story with the Gary Grigsby games is for the last 5 years, I have wanted to get into all of them so badly, but I could just never quite wrap my head around it or honestly find the time for it either. And a number of times tried to download a manual, read through hundreds of pages, etc. But I finally this year came to the realization with War in the East 2, I've got to just jump into the game and keep playing and keep playing. And that's what's gotten me into it. But the community, I really couldn't have gotten to this point in my understanding of the game without the community that exists on the Matrix forums, some local Discord community chats that exist out there for hex-based games or other YouTube influencers, and then comment sections in these YouTube videos and other YouTubers that have made series on the Gary Grigsby games. So I hope that we can all continue to share that knowledge with this series and others that other streamers may have out there. So let's get right into it, and you see that we're in the main menu of War in the East 2, and we're going to first look at what our game options are so I can show you what we're going to be playing with. So we're going to be playing as the Soviets, so that's unchecked. We're going to have Fog of War on, and we're going to leave Automate AI Air Assist off. I will be toggling the Automate AI Assist off and on throughout the series. The AI Assist is extremely competent, and sometimes for some turns, the complexity of it may just not be worth spending 1 or 2 full episodes just going into the detail of the air war. So I may leverage the AI to help out a little bit there and just show you how you can give the AI some general direction of what to do. When we look down here at the difficulty settings, we're going to give the German player the following values: 110 across the board for morale, forts, logistics, transport, and admin. And if you are anywhere from an average to an experienced player, or after your first couple of games where you feel like you have a grasp of what's going on, I would suggest that you turn the morale level up to at least 110, as it does give you a much more challenging and authentic experience in the game. The AI is still good regardless, but with a morale level at 110, it really gives you a pretty fair fight in most games. So we're going to leave it at that, and we're going to keep all of ours at 100, which is just normal. Closing out of that, we're now going to go to Pick Scenario, and we're going to choose the 1941 campaign. And you see that this begins with turn 1 in June 22nd, 1941. This is when the Germans launched Operation Barbarossa. And it's going to end 1945, August 4th. That's 215 turns. This is where I really do have to stress. I have never gotten more than a couple of turns into the 1941 campaign. I'm still a new player to the game, and the game has only been out for a couple of months. It could very well be that after 20 turns, I lose. I have no expectation of winning or losing in this. I just want to share my experience of playing through the scenario. Um, and I'm certain that along the way I'll get some help from everyone in the comments that will probably ensure I at least don't get beat up too early. But this game may only run till turn 170 if we're successful and we make it to Berlin sooner than expected, right? So that's variable. It doesn't necessarily imply that we're going to have 215 turns. In my Stalingrad to Berlin scenario, we're currently averaging 2 episodes per game turn. This one will probably be pretty similar. However, I expect for the first, say, 5 turns of the game, we may actually be looking at 2 or 3 episodes per turn, as there is so much that has to be done to not only maintain a front line as the Soviets, but also just to establish a front line. Because at the beginning of the war, you will see no such front line exists as is. So we have to make that all for ourselves. So there's a little bit of a historical overview here, but what I want to touch on is the scenario overview. So for the Axis player, their objective is to destroy the Red Army decisively, seizing Moscow, Leningrad, and Rostov before the end of 1941. Right? So as the Soviet player, that's kind of a very high-level strategy of what we have to prevent the AI from being capable of doing. If we can do that, and if we can make it into 1942, then we stand a real good chance of actually winning this scenario in total, just through a matter of attrition and the size of the Soviet Union's resources. As the Soviet player described further, we have to initially delay and disrupt the Axis offensives, then conduct a strategic counteroffensive to destroy the Axis armies and seize Berlin. Now that counteroffensive, like I mentioned, really is not going to begin until 1942. So we're going to find ourselves with at least 25 turns where we're not even on the offensive. We may have some counterattacks, but they will be minimal. Really, the name of the game is survival until we can at least get to the winter of 1941. In the summer and fall, it's all hands on deck. We've got to defend the Soviet Union. Okay? So let's go ahead and load up this game. And we're going to call this... Wow. Apologies for that. Let's play Soviet Union 1941 campaign. So then I'll remember what that is. And I'm going to let it go through and talk a little bit as the German player is actually executing their different phases here. So it's going to start with their air execution phase, as every turn does. And here you can see in the bottom right the number of sorties the German player is executing, along with how many losses they have broken out by the type of loss. So you see right off the bat that they've lost 160. I mean, these numbers keep racking up. I'm not going to be able to keep up with it, but it's incredible to see just how many of their losses are coming from air combat. What is more shocking, though, is look at the Soviet Union's losses. And again, this certainly was the historical pattern that we saw in the first week of Operation Barbarossa. The air losses on the Soviet side were absolutely devastating. And it's something that's really going to handicap us for the first portion of the war, and we may not seriously see ourselves engaging heavily in the air war until the summer of 1942. One of our objectives that we're going to have at the beginning of the scenario here is just to try to make sure as much as possible our area armies, where feasible, stay intact and are able to pull back from the front line that the Germans are pushing. So then we have something to work with in future turns and next year. So it goes through for the air scenario day by day. There's a day phase and a night phase of each day of the week, so 14 phases in total. And now it's going to be going through and executing all the ground movement phases. I might try to skip past some of them where I can. And this is going to just... it's going to hurt, right, if you're looking up here at the battle results, and just how severe of losses we as the Soviets are taking. But really, this was the only chance the Germans had of actually having a victory against the Soviet Union, was this type of blitzkrieg offensive that destroyed entire portions of the Soviet Union's military. And there's a lot of historical reasons for why the Germans were so successful in this first turn. One reason was their development in practice with modern warfare techniques and tactics on the Western Front in Europe, and their successes that they obviously had there in Poland, France. So they were battle hardened, right? That's one factor. The other is that from a Soviet Union perspective, they had actually gone through their military and had this great purge not years, but a couple of years prior to 1941, that even the leadership of the Soviet Union was still trying to recover from, the military leadership. So that really hindered the ability to respond, because there wasn't the talent, the expertise, and the organizational structure that was needed there from those purges. And that was all out of a bit of a hysteria from Stalin, of thinking that the military may be trying some type of coup against him, and his lifelong pattern of just not trusting other individuals is really what led to it. The second thing that really hurts the Soviets here during this time period is they were actually in the midst of a bit of a reworking of their military. They were trying to modernize their military when this strike happened. So they had large elements of their forces that weren't even at a battle readiness, because they were trying to reform into new organizational structures, to reform with new equipment, new vehicles, new machinery. So they were really in a, think of it like with a sports franchise going through a bit of a rebuild phase, right? You had some successes, you won some championships, and then you have a rebuild period of years where you're trying to get new young talent you can develop. You've sold off or traded some of your more veteran players, right, to try to get younger prospects. They were in a rebuild phase with their military. So all of these things coupled together resulted in the Germans having incredible success here in this first week of the operation, where they were able to go from, say, East Prussia near Königsberg, and actually make it all the way up to Riga, something that we saw on the screen just a few moments ago. So overall, you look at this and it's just there is a huge stack of chips of Soviet Union forces that did exist here that just now don't, right? And look at this, you can see how they come and they actually surround the Soviet forces and then attack, and because of the encirclement, just routing them. And all those little black shaded chips up there, those are all units that have routed, right? So the leader has lost their ability to command that unit, and they have just, in whatever direction those soldiers might have wanted to go, have just started a full-on rout retreat, running for the hills, if you will, away from the enemy forces. The other thing to note, and I promise I'm not going to get into the gritty details of the game. Again, I suggest the Stalingrad to Berlin scenario for that. But I want to point out on the chips here, each of these little tiles, you have a number followed by an equal signs and a second number. So the first number represents what the attacking combat value is, and the second, the defensive combat value. And a very simplistic way of looking at combat in this game is there are these combat values assigned to each unit, and if you're the attacker, if you've got 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 odds, that's usually the tipping point of where you will likely win the attack, not getting into the details of all the other factors of combat. So if you have a combat value to attack of 10, your opponent has a combat value to defend of 3, 9 times out of 10, probably even higher than that, you're going to win. I point that out because I want you to see along the front line, look at the vast difference here in the combat status of these units, right? We have 1 and 1, 1 and 9, 2 and 11, 1 and 6, etc. Whereas our opponent, right, their forces are 27, 28, 25, 24, 43. It's just not even close to a fair fight. This stack now has a combat value of 77 to attack. They just attacked right there with about 160 combat value against 26. So that's just a bit of a demonstration of how overwhelming the German forces were during this first week. And you'll see too these gray darkened hexes. These are all hexes that the German player has taken this turn. The red hexes represent ours, which from the German perspective are enemy hexes. So when it becomes our turn, we will then see German hexes in red. And look how far they have progressed up here, outside of Warsaw, right? Just all along this railroad, they're about to cut off these forces here around Minsk, right? And this is going to be a problem, and this is, again, pretty historically correct, that there were these large swaths where it wasn't just an army, it was groups of armies the Soviets had that became encircled in these large pockets, and the Germans were able to just slowly constrict them tighter and tighter, and in very, very few circumstances were the Soviet Union able to actually break out of those pockets in any meaningful way. Yeah. So here they're continuing their advance. They kind of do what you will find our pattern will be, and that is working from north to south along the front line, executing all the ground phase orders. We're going to follow a very similar pattern. Now, in the south, they're actually not going to continue having this much success all the way in the south, because in the south, which is now really kind of modern-day Ukraine, there was actually a situation where the Soviet forces were just a little more well-off, a little more prepared, and the Germans didn't have as much of a focus as they did in what the Germans referred to as Army Group North and Army Group Center. Army Group North was responsible for taking Leningrad, Army Group Center was responsible for taking Moscow, and Army Group South was tasked with taking Kiev, Rostov, and the Crimea, and Sevastopol, and later would continue to push on towards Stalingrad. Although here in this first week of the series, it really wasn't necessarily a key milestone for the German High Command going into it. The original intent was to try to make it to Moscow and Leningrad and Rostov. Trying to skip past these so we can speed it up a little bit. We don't have too much more to go until we'll be able to get into our turn and go over a little bit about what our tactics and what our plans are going to be for the series. I'm sitting here watching all of this, and I've prepped to do the series, but still seeing it play out like this really emphasizes how big of a task we have ahead of ourselves. And the first portion of this Let's Play series is going to be a little bit of edge on your seat type stuff as we try to just survive until 1942. Here they're going through their air resupply, so I think they're about wrapped up with their turn. Yep, here we go. You see now the red UI template pops up, meaning that it's the Soviet player's turn. It's going through our logistics phase right now. So now we're going to have an opportunity to examine our situation and see what we want to do to not lose in the most embarrassing fashion. Again, I fully rate myself as just an average player. I certainly think it's feasible that I'm not even successful in this Let's Play series and that we do end up losing. But this isn't going to be some type of situation where if it starts going south, we just scrap it. We will do our best to see it out to the end, whether it's a win or a loss. And it's now doing a bit of a save before we get into our air phase. Okay, so we have this turn summary that happens at the end of every turn that you see at the start of your turn. I should clarify there a little. And we're going to read through just some key points from it. At the very top, we show number of friendly losses. So in that last 7-day period, we lost over 300,000 men. over 5,000 guns, and these can be artillery filled pieces, they can be anti-air, they can be anti-tank guns, right? That's what these represent. 1,942 armored fighting vehicles. So again, this could be tanks, right? What so many are familiar with, but it could also be things like self-propelled guns and such that were really popular later on in the war. We also lost 3,650 airframes, and you will always hear me say airframes because it's so important in this game. Airframes are the actual, say, fighter craft, right? The mechanical thing that flies in the sky. We lost 3,650 airframes. The reason it's important to distinguish them is the game goes into such incredible detail that you also have pilots. And often the pilot matters just as much, if not more, than the actual airframe. And your pilot may actually survive even if the airframe does not. So if you have an ace pilot that gets shot down, but they manage to either crash land or evac or what have you from the plane, that may not necessarily mean you lost 3,650 skilled pilots. So that's why that's important. Order of battle changes. This is going to be 0 here for the first turn, and we'll cover it in future turn summaries. But it just notates in each of the theaters that are represented in the game, what were the net changes in each of these buckets, as well as for the opposing player. So we have on map or map, which is what we're dealing with and we're looking at right here. Then we have Northern Europe, Transcaucasus, Far East, and reserve theater boxes that are all represented here. So things may move from, say, your reserve pool to your on map. They may move from the northern front to on map or vice versa. So that's what this represents. Logistics, these are just very high level numbers for you in terms of how much freight was received, how much you have in your pool, etc. Combat units alert I do like to pay attention to as a good gauge for how well we're in supply across our armies. So the two numbers I really like to focus on are low supply. So we have 45 units that are at less than 75% supply, and under strength. So we have 58 units that are at less than 65% of their full fighting force strength. Down here we have a little bit of a victory point tracker. Victory points are how a winner is decided in the game. And you'll see for some of these major towns, right, they actually have victory point values assigned to them. So that's how you can either win or lose the game. Your opponent can capture the needed victory points to win, or you can capture enough to win. Let's also take a look at new events up here. So situation report, I'm not going to read through all of this, but the gist of it is that historical overview of exactly what happened on the 22nd of June, 1941, historically, and provides some interesting background. Then we get these notifications that, okay, in the Transcaucasus region, we don't have enough forces there, and this is something we're going to have to manage throughout the game, because you have to send divisions, air wings, etc. to these theater boxes to fight the war there, even if you're not physically represented on a map, moving units from left to right and north to south. So here we actually lost a victory point and an administrative point because we have shortages in the Transcaucasus region, as well as the Far East and the Northern Front, right? So all of these caused us to actually lose some victory points. Now that that's done, I'm going to close out the turn summary here, and we're going to zoom out and look at the map in whole. And we are going to go through the air phase. I am going to turn the AI assist on, and I will have it on probably for the first couple of turns. And one of the reasons is right now trying to, say, run ground support through Northwestern Air Command and micromanage it is just so futile right now. So instead, I'd rather the computer help us by just making sure that as we move various headquarter units to the rear, right, as we begin our retreat, right, from this onslaught of German forces that are coming after us, that the AI then help us manage moving those back with us. So what we're going to do is go to our various air armies here, select the Baltic Fleet Command, and we're going to go to their little window and say, we want you to retreat. And these are 4 stances that you can have. Retreat means they're going to follow the HQ unit and be in the furthest most to the rear as they can air bases. If it was advanced, they would try to find the most forward air bases within range of that headquarters units, but with retreat, it's going to go to the rear. We'll also take a look at this Northwestern Recon Group. Here you only have 18 anyway, so that may not be worth much. Have you guys retreat. Now let's look at probably 1st Back Air Corps. We're going to have you retreat as well, just because you may have some forces towards the front. Your REL Air Command is going to retreat. Western Air Command is definitely going to retreat. These guys are at the front right now. Northwestern Air Command, the box of operations looks so large here because this HQ unit was probably pushed back so far and they're now so spread out. But we need you to retreat as well. Southwestern Air Command, we will retreat. And Southern Air Command will also retreat. I think Black Sea Fleet Air Command, we will have retreat as well. So now that that's done, and we have our AI assist on, okay, we're now going to execute the air phase. This will be pretty short. This load through each of the days. You can see in these little windows too, it gives you a status. So the 3 different types of aircraft, the number you have, and then what % you are in terms of fighting force. Now in day 5 of 7, getting into day 6. All right. So now we are to the ground phase. And we are not, even if I made a 2-hour episode, we are not going to be able to go through and reasonably execute all of our ground movement in this one episode. So what I want to do is speak very high level to what our strategy is going to be, take a look at some unit examples, and then in episode 2 of the Let's Play, we will manage all of the movements in the northern half of our front. And then in the following episode, episode 3, we will manage everything in the south of our front. So let's first just take a look at the different fronts that we want to create. So I'm going to use a bit of a pen drawing tool, and I'm not able to capture the Crimea all on one view with Stalingrad, so we'll come down to that a little later. So the first thing that I want to say is, well, what are like the first pockets of resistance that we want to actually focus on creating, right? What are the priorities to say, okay, in these areas, we want to at least slow them down a little. The first is going to be right here in front of Peskov. So they're going to be heading north now that they've captured Riga in a race to get to Leningrad. They're also going to race north to Tallinn. So certainly I could have the option of saying, okay, let's try to cut them off here at Tallinn. The flaw, though, is if we try to form a southern perimeter to defend Tallinn, is we then run the risk of them coming up on our eastern flank here and cutting us off in this little bridgehead that exists between Tallinn and Leningrad. So instead, there's actually very good geography for us from a defensive position. So we're going to abandon Tallinn, and we're going to set up a defensive line here that looks at this little gap north of the lake, and we're going to defend this side on the east once they've taken Tallinn. So our first little pocket of resistance is going to be south of Peskov and this little note here north of this lake. The other area of resistance that I want to form is right here around Smolensk. Now we're going to have a separate front that does go through Smolensk as well. But I want to first just put something here to slow them down a little, because this is the most forward of their advances, and it really is this group that we want to slow down from making a complete dash towards Moscow. So we're going to put in a little bit of brakes on the situation here, and we're just going to sacrifice some units to create a small little wall here before they even get to the Smolensk defensive perimeter, as we'll refer to it. The other area here is by Kiev. Now, historically, Kiev, the Soviets did try very hard to hold on to the city, and it ended up being one of the worst encirclements that they suffered in the entire war. We are not going to try to hold Kiev. We are very much going to abandon Kiev, but I'm still going to put some forces here as a bit of a slowing or stopping mechanism from them just being able to waltz into the city. Let's now actually take a look at where we want our main line to be. Oh, what have I done here? Give me just a second here, guys. Nope, that's not what I want. One more time. So let's look at the main line of defense we have. Sorry for the technical issues. Our main line is going to be protecting Leningrad. This line of forests that goes south to Lake Ilmen. Lake Ilmen down south here. And this is not going to be a perfect line like this. But then we're going to go over towards Rzhev, out towards Smolensk, front of Smolensk, down to Orel, down to Kursk, down to Kharkov, and then we're going to follow south to the Dnieper like this. You can think of this as like the first priority line that we want to get established. In all actuality, what's probably going to happen is they're probably going to be able to break through in a couple of areas. The first is going to be here near Smolensk. And I think I drew this a little incorrect. Just imagine I didn't have that line. We're going to try to hold something like this where it's just... Fill this in. We're going to defend this pocket here to the northwest of Smolensk. What will end up happening, though, is we're not going to be able to hold Smolensk. It just will not happen. It will fall. But this is going to be the first line that we build. Following that, what I want to do is let me get a different color here. I want to then have reinforcement pockets around Rzhev, around Tula, obviously in front of Moscow, Voronezh, Stalino, Rostov. And then when we're looking to Leningrad, if we do indeed lose Leningrad, we're going to have a very tough time, but we're just going to try to form a bit of a defensive perimeter here between Lake Ilmen and here north of Yaroslav, where we're defending in these forests. So take note, please, of some of these areas that we're really trying to focus on defensively. And that is, we need to use terrain to our advantage. So everyone knows about Russian winters and how they are the worst nightmare of any invading force. Yes, that is a given. And it's true that if we make it to the winter of 1941, it probably means that we're going to survive and will likely be able to win this scenario, but then there's a whole bunch of other interesting questions like how quickly can we win, how well can we win, yada yada. The winter is a thing that will ultimately, if they don't get all the strategic objectives by winter, will cause the Germans to lose. But the second thing to note is that the German success and their ability to do everything that we see down here by Minsk and Riga, their ability to do that relies on mechanized and armored forces. And let me tell you something. If you didn't know this, it's a fun fact. Mechanized and armored forces do not fight well in heavy woods or swampland. Who knew? News to me too. But they don't fight well there. So what I want to do is use some of our geography that we have, where we have these heavy woods by Rzhev, We have these heavy woods just really all around Leningrad, to be fair. Um, and down here by Tula, right, where we're just going to dig in so tough in these areas that we're able to stop these panzer units, these mechanized and motorized units, from breaking through. The hardest area that's going to be to do that, as you see in the south, right? Because looking at the map, right, where you don't see green, right? This is the hex detail for light woods and heavy woods. Where you don't see that green, these are just open plains, right? The wheat basket that is the modern day Ukraine was also so back in World War II. And these are just open fields that panzers would love to race across. So we don't have that advantage in the south. What we have in the south, though, is we have rivers. So you see down here, now I'm going to focus in just on this little pocket. In the south, oh, I've done that again. I will continue to get better using these drawing tools, I promise. In the south, we have these rivers, and this is like the Dnieper, right? This is going to form one of our first defensive lines right here, specifically in the south. Then behind that, we're going to do additional pockets where we defend here across this river, here, before they push onto Rostov, down here before they push to the Crimea, and finally we have geography to our advantage, but there's only about 4 or 5 spots that they can actually cross into the Crimea. So we're going to use geography to our advantage in the south, but it's not going to be from heavy woods. It's going to be using the rivers that are available. So there's rivers in northern Russia too. Please don't mistake what I'm saying there. But it's the best that we have for us to leverage in the south. So that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to build that initial pocket here around Kiev, but really our focus is going to be on reinforcing this line, building secondary pockets here in front of Stalino and Rostov, and then building secondary pockets to prevent their advance onto the Crimea. So, you know, the Germans made it pretty quickly past Odessa and into the Crimea historically. And once the German forces got into the Crimea, it was always going to be a bit of the Soviets won't be able to hold it. In my mind, certainly that would be open for debate or argument, I'm sure, and I respect those thoughts. But in my mind, I don't think once they got into the Crimea, the Soviets were ever going to stop them from getting Sevastopol. So my goal is to stop them here, and if I don't, I'm going to take those forces, and I'm just going to leave a token force by Sevastopol, but then I'm going to retreat into the Caucasus region and use those forces to not only protect Krasnodar, but also to take those forces north to help with the reinforcement of Rostov. If we actually get to that point, we'll let Sevastopol go, we'll take our forces back and redeploy them. Because I don't think that once they get past this bottleneck of the Crimean Peninsula, that we actually stand a chance of defending the Crimea. So, all right, that lays out my general strategy for how we're going to go about this. So in the next 2 episodes, it's going to be very chaotic. There is not a lot of structure to it, but we're going to just survey all of our forces we have, and we're going to start pulling them back to prepared positions as best we can, right? And there's no guide to this. There is no document that says take this army and put it back here necessarily. So I'm going to be going through and trying to map each of those armies and where they're going to go, make sure that we have a good distribution of forces. At the same time, we also need to manage, we have many reinforcements coming our way in the coming turns that we'll need to consider of where we want to deploy them. And then we also have to manage freight capacity and such, because some of these more high-profile units, especially the armor units that we have at the beginning here, we're going to be using, for example, our rail transportation to just quickly pull them back from the line, so that way we don't lose all of that heavy equipment to the German blitzkrieg here. So with that, I want to thank everyone for giving the video a watch. There are going to be a ton of links in the description to the product page for War in the East 2, to the Matrix forums, where there's a great community that can help everyone out. And I'm also going to link our Stalingrad to Berlin Let's Play, because I think that might be really valuable if you're new to Gary Grigsby or new to War in the East 2, to help you get a little acclimated over time to various mechanics the game offers. In that series, every other episode, when possible, we introduce 1 to 2 new mechanics for you to learn the game kind of by a slow progression instead of okay, watch 5 hours of tutorial videos on how to play the game. You get to see all the actions I'm doing, follow along, and then also have various mechanics explained to you. This series, we're not going to be diving into that as deep. I'm going to assume that you have some basic understanding of the game for much of this series. So, with that, strategy gamers, hope you have yourselves a great day, and I will see you soon with episode 2. Bye now.